Hi, I'm Steve Hassan, and I have old friends that I haven't talked with in years, Kerry Noble. And was his original book, Tabernacle of Hate, that came out as a paperback, detailing his story, which is insanely interesting and powerful. And Kerry's one of the good guys who, coming out of a cult, has wanted to help others and wanted to illuminate what the mindset is and what to do, what not to do. And Kerry, you reached out just a few days ago. I said, we got to do a recording. And so I really want you to, would you mind introducing yourself? We've done some talks together years ago, but just let people know who you are and your special background and what you want to share with us of your wisdom.
As you say, my name is Kerry Noble. My wife and I have been married for 47, 47 years now.
Uh-huh.
I'll be 48 this year. When we were a lot younger, in 1977, we decided to move to a small rural town in northern Arkansas to be with some friends of ours who were members of a community church. They owned some property, all living together. There's about 8 couples at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we initially went up there to have our second child up there by natural childbirth, see our friends, and then come home and finish Bible school, that kind of stuff. But we ended up just liking the place, falling in love with it. In those days, it was just a Christian community. It was non-racist, non-paramilitary, non-violent, that kind of thing. So, as with most cults, you start off with a good intention, and somewhere along the line, you start getting off a little bit more at a time, and pretty soon you find yourself in boiling water.
Yeah.
That's kind of what heaven does. So over the first year was very good. The second year, we started buying guns to protect ourselves because we were a apocalyptic group, thinking that at any moment, society was going to collapse, World War III, whatever was going to happen before Jesus came back scenario.
Right.
And so we figured, well, we need to protect ourselves when the hordes of evil people would come out of the cities. So we started doing that, started training.
What year was this?
This started in the summer of 78.
Okay.
So I'd been there a little over a year at this point.
So summer of 78 would have been a few months before Jonestown, actually.
Yeah. In fact, I remember we watched Jonestown news religiously, and it was so funny because I remember all of us looking at each other and go, how can you be so stupid? And
well, you're laughing now after what you
after that, it was
through.
Horrible. Yeah, obviously it was very horrible, but yeah, you laugh at it and you find yourselves almost in the same position a few years later. So it's not a laughing matter, but it was ironic for us.
Right, but nobody thinks they're in a cult. They think other groups are cults, right? You've got the truth, you've got God, you've got Jesus.
Yeah. Yep. We believed, as I said, apocalyptic. So we were preparing, and that was fine. The guns, it was defensive just in case people came against us, that kind of thing. So we trained, and we ended up becoming what was known in those days as survivalists.
Yep.
We knew the guns, we knew what to do, and all that kind of thing.
One of the first groups in America, if I'm not mistaken, is that true?
One of the first, if not the first, paramilitary group. We were classified in those days as the #1 civilian SWAT team in the United States. So very well prepared. We spent $52,000 on guns, ammunition, and military equipment within the first 18 months that we started. So we were very serious about it.
Yeah.
Well, then that wasn't too bad, but a little over a year later, about 15 months later, then we got into the racist aspect, or started to get into it. We were introduced to the theology known as Christian identity, which is the primary racist theology of the religious right. or extremist right. It took us a while. It took us about 6 months to really go through it, examine it, look at it, and finally adapt it to our own theology.
Now, how'd you get introduced to it? Was it a book or a person or what?
No, the leader of our group, Jim Ellison, he was a welder by trade, and he went to work up in Missouri on the old missile silos, from the Cold War days.
Right.
And he met a man named Dan Gaiman, who had a thing called the Church of Israel up in Missouri. Gaiman introduced him to the concept. I can remember Jim brought home a cassette player and said, "This is one of their church services. You need to listen to it," and gathered all the elders together. And they started out playing patriotic songs, America the Beautiful, My Country 'Tis of Thee. And then he got into the message of the white race being the true Israel of God, which of course was so foreign to us at that point. But, he went through a lot of scriptures, obviously at different angles than we were used to.
Yeah.
But the one thing about him that was different than the churches that Jim and I had been raised in, they were willing to talk about race in the scripture. Whereas the Southern Baptists, my church would never talk about race, what the Bible has to say about it. So that was our hook into the movement at that point. The whole patriotic thing hit all of us pretty good. We all loved America. That's why we were doing what we were doing, basically.
Right.
For Jesus.
By the way, if I can just interrupt and say, in the Moonies, I was in 74 to 76 before my deprogramming, but after a few months, I learned about the Ham teaching, the Ham teaching, the three sons, and that was the dark race, and they were punished, and so there was a big racist thing in the Moonies.
Yeah, and that was actually a Southern Baptist teaching also about Ham was cursed,
right?
And then became black somehow.
Yes,
and that's what started the black race. So, you had some inklings in there from the Southern Baptist days. Jim was raised disciples of Christ. He had sort of the same teachings, but of course we were both taught Israel. The Jews were God's chosen people, that kind of thing. So. It took about 6 months to sort through it all. So by the spring of 80, we did finally sort through it. Still had some questions, but nothing that's kept us from going on and adapting it into our own theology.
Well, let's speed up because I'm concerned with the listeners because you have a lot more to share, and I want to focus on the present day and your message to people today. So,
well, the primary thing, of course, of what happened eventually was we got raided in 1985 started April 19th of 1985 by the 300 law enforcement officers from the FBI's hostage rescue team all the way down to the locals for a warrant on Jim for illegal weapons. We had a 4-day standoff. I was the negotiator between us and the FBI.
Weren't you a leader, if I can interrupt?
I was the number 2 guy at the time.
Okay.
They're just right under Jim. Him and I had been on the outs for a couple of years by that point. He wanted me to go down and stall. I wanted to go down and negotiate for a peaceful surrender. Right. So thankfully, we did get to surrender. Jim surrendered. Nobody was hurt. And Jim was arrested, went to prison. Most of the rest of us who had any kind of leadership position got arrested about a month or so later. Most of us about half of us went to prison, half got a probation. You
went to jail though, didn't you?
I did. I spent 26 months in jail and prison.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a 5-year sentence.
And I'm remembering
the best days.
And I'm remembering, forgive me because it's been so long. Didn't you bring a bomb into a church?
1984, to make amends with Ellison, I volunteered to go on a mission to what we would call start the Second American Revolution, the race riots, that kind of stuff. Initially, I was going to go to a gay park in Kansas City
Mhm.
Shoot whoever I saw there. It had just previously had some news reporting done on it the week before I went. Got to, and I had a silenced weapon with me, plus a briefcase of C4 explosives to go to a adult bookstore and blow it up. Those would be the two signs to everybody in the movement. Went to the park, drove around several times, and saw absolutely nobody. So, that plan kind of went to the side. Went to find a adult bookstore, took the briefcase of C4 in with me, wasn't allowed to take the briefcase, of course, further back where I needed to take it because I hadn't thought about it ahead of time, but I realized once I couldn't take it, they figured, well, you'll try to shoplift, put stuff in the briefcase, and so I couldn't take it back there. So one of the men was with me who was raised in Kansas City. We decided to spend the night, see what God wanted us to do the next morning, and he said, well, let's go to my old church while we're waiting. And this is on Sunday morning, of course. So we drove up to the church, and it was now not his church, but the community, something community church. I forget, the gay church.
Mhm.
I'm losing the word right now. But it was the number one gay and lesbian church in the United States, denomination-wise.
Hmm.
So we figured, well, this is the sign from God,
All right.
Took it in there, stayed for half an hour, and that gave me more than enough time to really start thinking about what I was doing, the ramifications, what I would do if I did this. At that time, it would have been the biggest domestic terrorist act committed in U.S. history if I'd done it. Talk about 70 people or so. And I decided after they started the music and I saw the gays and lesbians start to worship God and sing songs, that it was no different than what we did at the farm.
Mhm.
So, I saw them as people trying to find their place in God. Rather than homosexuals, they became Christians from
Right.
my point of view. And I couldn't kill Christians, so I left. So, year
And you
after
took
that,
the bomb with you, right? So.
oh yeah, I took the bomb, which C4 is it was triggered, everything. All I had to do was flip the switch when I opened the briefcase. So it was not a
So were you going to be a
hardest thing to do.
suicide bomber, or was there a
Oh
time?
no, we'd set the timer. It'd give
Okay.
us about 5, maybe 10 minutes at the most to get out and get away. Then it would blow up. No, suicide was
So
never the
glad you
issue.
didn't do it.
Oh, me
So
too.
that's what led to the federal people coming to the compound to.
Well, actually, they never knew about that until after I wrote about it.
Wow.
It never had any input. They were there because of the guns and other
Was it in
illegal.
this book?
Well, the first one, I talked about it in the first one. And of course, it's in the second one also. Yeah.
Right, but people can buy this one if they want to really know your story, which I
Yes,
highly
sir.
recommend.
So, most of us spent some time in jail. I spent quite a while, 26 months, like I said. Gave me plenty of time to get my head on straight, think about what I had been doing, what I'd been teaching or learning, and gave me time. It still took me, I got out in 87, still took me 4 years to really start to sort stuff out. And then I joined, I finished my 5-year sentence in 1990. 1991, I joined Toastmasters International. That gave me a chance to speak publicly for the first time about my past. So probably 80 to 90% of all my speeches were about the old CSA days. So I could get
Covenant,
it out of my
sword,
system.
and the arm of the Lord for anyone who's listening. And one of the earliest white supremacy, violent paramilitary cults in the United States.
Yeah, we did a lot of bad stuff. There was us and the order. They did probably more stuff than what we did.
Mhm.
They got busted the year before we did. So
Yeah.
once the FBI found out really what was going on in the movement, they wanted to squash it as quick as possible.
Of course. And you were already out of the cult when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building.
Yeah, I was had long left everything. By that point, I had gotten everything sorted out. That was in 95. Of course, you had the Branch Davidians the 2 years before that,
Right, of
which
course.
was, 70 miles from where I lived. So that hit home.
Wow.
And then, of course, Oklahoma City, as soon as I saw it on the news, first thing I said was, they've done it. The right wing has finally done it, because ironically, it was the same building that we had targeted in the old CSA days to blow up also.
And
So I knew
McVeigh
there
was
had to
a
be a connection.
veteran, right? He was trained,
Yeah.
he was a vet, right? He was disillusioned and was angered at the government for the way they treated the Branch Davidians, right?
Mhm. And of course, had the Turner Diaries, the old basic blueprint for everything.
Yep. A lot of people don't know about the Turner Diaries. Can you give a few sentences?
It's just basically a fictional book by an author who was in the movement, who said, here's a possible scenario of what could happen. Of course, rather than the Murrah building, it was the FBI building in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much, according to the book, is what McVeigh did, except for the actual location.
Right.
So it's very ironic and kind of spooky
Right.
what he did.
Right.
Was a direct tie into the right wing movement.
Yep. And we crossed paths. I know you were on a panel of hate, combating extremism and hatred for the American Psychological Association. When Dr. Philip Zimbardo was the president of there, he asked us to do a panel together. And so you've been trying to help people, get away from these cults and understand them, right?
That, and understand the whole mentality of the right wing. When you get to the mentality, the philosophy behind it, and especially the theology behind it, it's very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Your first book, The Combating
Mind Control,
was, I had gotten it shortly.
I have a new version. I updated it, but
good.
But this is
the that one really helped me to sort of put in the pieces, of some things that were lacking of my understanding. Okay, now I see how this fit in, why we went from this point to this point. So that really helped me.
Yeah,
and
great.
Then when I started speaking in 1996, right after the Oklahoma City bombing, I got debriefed by the FBI to see what they thought they should do better than, so that they didn't have another Oklahoma. What can they learn from Oklahoma City? And that kind of started me getting into the terrorist conferences and speaking there about my background. And
right, you did stuff for the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, and other places.
Right. Yeah, civil rights, human rights, that kind of stuff. Wherever I could speak, I was willing to do it.
And my recollection is that you're religious, you're a Christian, you still love God. And
yes, sir.
Right.
Yep. Spirituality is still my main passion.
Yep, great. And you're in Texas.
I am.
Okay.
I've been here ever since I got out of prison. My wife moved back here a couple of years after, before then, shortly after I went to prison.
Great.
So when I got out, I came here. This was where my family was.
Great. So then you kind of retired. You said, I need a break. I'm gonna.
Well, no, I got out in '87. So I still hadn't started speaking, but shortly after, a few years after I started speaking, of course, 9/11 happened.
All right.
That's what kind of pushed it out, because now everything was focused on foreign terrorism, not domestic terrorism.
Got it.
And so the invitations kind of quit coming.
Yeah.
I tried doing some stuff on my own. I had a little website, had a little newsletter kind of thing. But within a few years, two organizations came up called the Against Violent Extremism, that organization, and then Life After Hate. Well, to be honest, after a certain point, I felt like the old man in the room. There were so many younger people that had just more recently gotten out, that were speaking out. Mm-hmm. I figured, well, they're more recent. Their news is more recent. They probably more relevant to the times, and I just kind of faded into the background.
Yep. So let's go to the present times. You know, we're doing this interview February 4th of 2021, and Joseph Biden has been sworn in as president. A lot of people expected him not to be inaugurated. They expected some type of coup or some type of martial law or something. It was expected. It didn't happen. And there's a whole bunch of people who believe in Trump still, who think the election was not won by Biden. So tell us what you think, please.
Well,
give us your message to anyone listening that may.
Obviously, I was not a Trump fan. As soon as Trump started running, I saw him as the typical bully, and recognized right off the bat the cult mentality that he had.
Yep.
You know, if you've been in cults, it's easy to see it. You know, if you haven't, it's honestly way more difficult. But I saw it as soon as it, and I just could not believe how fast he rose, just calling people names on the stage, no policy, you know, spouting off the rhetoric that we always espoused in the right-wing movement. It was obvious where this guy was coming from.
Yep.
Was shocked, honestly, that he won the election first time around. And of course, in my point of view, it was a horrible 4 years. Well,
horrible. I agree. And I wrote the book, The Cult of Trump. It came out in 2019.
And it's true. It is a cult.
Yeah.
So once he ran again, I had determined if he was going to run, if he was going to win again, I was going to have to do something. I didn't know what, but I had to come out publicly again and say, no, this is a cult type of thing. It was, everything was pointing to it more and more and more. Fortunately, he lost. But then, of course, here comes the no, I didn't lose. Everything's rigged.
Right.
So you know,
and fake media and enemies of the people, and Biden is a communist and pedophile, you know, trafficking children and other nonsense.
Right, and then you get into the whole election fraud thing, and to be honest, it scared me that what could this man do before January's inauguration that would force him to be able to keep in power. You know, sort of nuclear war. I mean,
that was my fear.
Yeah.
Dirty bomb was my fear.
You know, both of us, you know how far the leaders are willing to go. You know,
that's what I wrote in The Cult of Trump. I said he's not going to go easy and it's going to be violent. And let's remember Jim Jones, when he knew he was going to be outed, he ordered his people to kill Leo Ryan, the congressman.
Yeah. So I knew there was nothing this guy was probably not willing to do, and his followers, his believers. And it was a scary scenario from my point of view, as it was yours.
Yeah.
What can happen? And then, of course, we see the Capitol riots, which was unexpected from my point of view. I expected some protests, but not the rioting. Was very, very aggressive with as many people as they had coming from all the distances that they came. So again, something needed to be done. So I just decided, you know, my story is still relevant. I had people starting to call me from the media, say, hey, what do you think about this?
Yep.
And, you know, so knowing something's got to be done. Fortunately, we were able to get to a peaceful inauguration and Biden becomes president.
Yep.
But it's the same cult scenario. You know, you deny that you've been defeated. I can remember when Ellison surrendered, how quick of a time it was till he said, well, God wants me to turn state's evidence against the right-wing movement. Now God's going to use me to purge America from the movement out of America. So you go from one deceptive scenario to another, still deceiving yourself. And, so then here comes Trump saying, well, I'm going to form this patriot.
So what do you want to say to vets who get taken in by this deception, who are sure that, you know, civil war needs to happen, and they're buying up guns like crazy in the last few weeks. Like, what do you want to say to them?
Well, everything that they're saying that they're going through, every cult, especially for groups like us that were paramilitary, that were racist, it goes through the same thing. We had our conspiracy theories, and in fact, conspiracy theories was one things that started waking me up, because at a certain point you start to realize how ludicrous they are.
Yep.
And once you kind of start getting that crack in there, and then you start kind of questioning other things. So
Right.
I know QAnon has some outlandish conspiracy theories.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had ours. Everybody does. But after a while, you'll get tired of hearing theory after theory, setting date after date after date.
Right.
The religious right comes in and says Trump's going to win. Pat Robertson, Trump's going to win, and then we're going to have an asteroid hit the Earth.
Yeah, they were prophesying like crazy.
Yeah. And once you start seeing that, well, the prophecies aren't coming true, then how are they excusing it? What are they coming up with next? You just start seeing the dominoes fall, or the house of cards starting to collapse. And that's really what I want them to understand is you don't need to panic. You just need to kind of open your eyes and kind of read between the signs that are given to you, the lines that are given to you, and see reality for a change, or you're going to get in trouble, which of course, so many of the writers are in trouble right now. So I have said for years that if you continue to go down the path of extremism, one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to get killed or you're going to spend a whole lot of time in prison.
Yeah.
And now these guys and some women are going to go to jail, go to prison.
Yeah.
And for what?
Yep. And I'm hearing of people unfortunately committing suicide.
Yeah.
It's just so hopeless.
It's their reality in the face, the slap in the face, which is what happened to me with the gay church bombing. That became my reality. I felt like I was slapped and say, wake up, and now hopefully some people are waking up, especially some of those who got arrested, saying, look, we just thought this was no big deal. We went along with the crowd. You got the whole mob mentality.
Yep.
Which is another cult thing. So you separate yourself from logical thinking of the consequences, thinking of ramifications of what could happen, and you end up doing stuff that you wish you hadn't done.
Right. But I just want to remark your radar for cult leader was same as mine. Like, I know this malignant narcissism, warning, danger. But I want to say there are a bunch of ex-cult members that haven't done their homework like you have and I have to really understand the techniques and mechanisms of how we came to adopt these beliefs and how our identities got changed. And they're in the cult of Trump now. They like switched, even though they were in a cult and left it. Now they're back in a cult.
I know there are some people from CSA days that got caught up into the Trump thing. And honestly, I really believe that a lot of that is they haven't healed from the first time around.
Exactly.
You and I took time to, like you said, to examine everything, to do self-examinations. Why did I get through this? Trying to objectively look at the steps. Some people, a lot of people from my group refused to do that. They went numb. They didn't want to think about anything else. And so now here comes somebody who kind of sparks the old flames from before and taps into the old fears from before. And they think, okay, here's another salvation door coming in right now. They just haven't taken the time to look and listen.
Right. So, Kerry, in your experience, was there anti-Semitism too, or just racist against, people who are African American?
Well, as you know, when you're talking about the right-wing movement, it's a wide spectrum.
Right.
I write about it in the book that you go from anything from just the protesting, my life isn't like I want it to be, who can I blame scenario, all the way to huge conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
In between that, you'll have various aspects of racism, whether you're blaming the blacks, blaming the Jews, blaming Hispanics,
Right.
foreigners coming in.
Right.
Can be different kind of things, and how you react to it is differently also. Some go to guns, some go to politics, some just want to scream and shout and call everybody different kinds of names. So it's a wide spectrum.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I totally agree. And this QAnon thing with getting soccer moms and yoga people and like recruiting, saying, we're going to save children from being kidnapped by traffickers and pedophiles, and just like sucking in a lot of nice people. But what's different about your experience and mine is the cell phone.
Yeah.
Want to say a few words about digital
Yeah.
reality?
In I think it was 82 or 83, Lewis Beam, who started the leaderless resistance aspect of the right-wing movement.
Oh, you need to explain that concept because it's very important, or we can circle back and finish your initial thought.
Well, leaderless resistance started with a term called the cell group. And what Beam said was, look, this was in 83 with in Congress in that summer, said, we got large groups of people knowing too much information, doing illegal stuff, to help overthrow the government. We got to shrink that down, because when large groups of people get busted, people start turning on each other, turning state's witness and stuff. So we got to go down to cells, which is in the area of 3 to 5 people. Fewer people that know that what's going on, the better. And then it got down from that to the lone wolf scenario of one person.
Yep.
Which is what Tim McVeigh was.
Yep.
So you get down that because that's the safest. One guy can do something nobody else knows, so nobody's going to turn state's evidence against him, turning him in ahead of time, that kind of thing, right? So now I lost my train of thought where we started.
No, but we were doing Lewis Beam, and I want to say that the Islamic extremists copied the leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll tell you how to make bombs. We'll show you how to, stab people and run them over with trucks. But you decide, when the time is right, when there's a lot of, helpless people around.
So what Lewis did was he came down to our group in 83 and said, look, I want to show you this computer bulletin business board, our system it was called in those days. He had a Commodore 64, which was nothing.
Right.
Nothing. And the term internet hadn't even been invented yet.
Right. So, it was 94 or 5 or 6.
Yeah.
In there, right?
So he brings it down. He shows me how to use this computer, which of course in those days you had to tell it every step to take, right? Type, go to this, go to that.
Yes, and literally G-O.
Yeah.
Space T-O, not mouses, not voice activated. Right. Go ahead.
And he said, this is how we will be able to communicate with each other rather than ham radios, rather than telephones that are being tapped by the government, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So he showed it to me, and I just said, nobody's going to buy this. It's too complicated. I just didn't go for it. In fact, I said, nobody's going to buy computers. It's, so I'm not a prophet.
Whoops.
Yeah, whoops. So, but he was right. It became the way for groups to communicate with each other. And of course now, and for years now, you've got all kinds of hate websites, hate groups on there.
There are online communities. You don't have to be in a physical compound anymore. You can literally be in digital space, totally surrounded, monitored,
and it is such an ego booster because you can call yourself a group and be you and your brother, you and your best friend,
right?
Just you,
right?
So you can feed your ego as much as you want to. And they don't really even monitor each other all that well. So you don't honestly know if you're being set up by somebody who wants to just scam you or somebody who's real serious.
Right.
It is dangerous. And of course, then they can reach out to the young people, start to manipulate them a lot easier. Because, the younger people are so in tune with digital than we are. Um,
Yeah, they grew up on computers and they can
yeah, it's second nature
text
to them.
so fast, I can't keep
Yeah.
up.
And then it's just even the stuff for young people of harassing other young people, calling them names, or just cult tactics is all it is. The mean girls kind of scenario.
Yep,
It's extremely dangerous.
yep, it is. So any advice you want to give to family and friends who have a loved one who is still in the Trump cult and are believing that we're in a civil war and that the
First of
government?
all, don't kick them out. If they're a family member, families first.
Yep.
Gotta believe in your family. I've got 6 children. 2 of them voted for Trump.
Uh-huh.
And one of them, I mean, they both get into the conspiracy stuff. Of course, they know my background. They've read my book. So you got to be patient with your
Yep.
relatives.
Yep.
It's not worth destroying your family over.
Yep, that's what I say to people too. It's like love is stronger than hate, and blood, this is your family. These are people you have long histories with, and just say, I love you, I respect you, I don't understand what you're believing. If you can explain it and show me evidence and persuade me, then I'll join you. But
But they can't.
otherwise,
So the best that you can do, one, you got to love them. You don't reject them. You don't kick them out. Second of all, then you have to do what you can to sort of expose the darkness with light. Be truthful with them. If they say something that is a lie or outlandish, challenge them without anger. Say, yeah, but what about? Have you thought about this?
But that's the questioning angle. That's what I recommend too. Ask them questions. I don't understand how this equals this, or explain that one to me.
I'll tell you this short story. When I was with CSA, of course, back in those days, we did not have the internet. We did not. The only communication you had was either you watch TV, newspapers. You had that kind of stuff. We didn't have that. We didn't have TVs. We couldn't read newspapers. Right. So all your communication we had was with other groups. Well, one time I got information from a group that said, look, even doctors know that there's a difference in races because doctors don't give black blood to a white person. I thought that was true. I had no reason to doubt it. I thought, okay, that makes sense. So I put it in our publication, sent it out. We had 2,000 people on our mailing list. And a doctor, for some unknown reason that he even saw my material, sent me all kinds of printed material that said that, no, that's not true. Blood is blood. There's types of blood, yes, but they're not based on races.
Right, and it's red.
Yeah.
For everybody.
So I started kind of reading it and realized how dangerous it was for me to read that because then I would be held responsible for it. So I put it to the side. But it was the first sort of crack that let some light in. If this is true, if what he's saying is true and what I'm saying is wrong, what else could I be saying that's wrong? And here's the interesting thing, Stephen. Years when I started speaking out in public, I had a radio interview. And of course, it was advertised ahead of time that I was going to be on there and everything. This doctor called into this radio interview and said, hey, I sent you some material on blood and all that. Did you ever get it? I said, yes, sir, I got it. He said, because I never heard from you. I said, no, you won't, because, then I'm responsible for what I read. And I said, but what you did helped my first step out of the movement because you showed me.
That's so great.
Yeah. So it's what seems like a minor kind of thing. So you just, like you said, you tell them truths, you ask questions, you have to make them think.
Right. But you show them respect. You don't call them names. You don't say they're crazy or stupid. Right.
That's right. And then once you start asking the questions, you get how it is with the cult deception. You quit thinking logically at a certain point. So you got to get those cobwebs out to where they can start thinking again on their own.
Yeah.
And you know, with the questions, and hopefully they'll start seeing things. And then the other thing is their own rhetoric. Once they start realizing, okay, all these preachers are saying Trump's going to win, all these people are saying this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and you start seeing things that don't happen, you point that out. What happened to this? What happened to that?
Yeah, and the Bible says, you're supposed to kill a prophet who says prophecy. If they're really following scripture,
Yeah,
the prophet, you should kill them, stone them, I think. So let me ask you about COVID and the conspiracy theories about, the vaccine, and it's a government conspiracy, and like, what's your take on what's happening with that?
Well, it's just the same scenario. I don't trust the government kind of stuff. And the hot button, obviously, for everybody that's in any kind of cult, is there something that you're not satisfied with in life? It always gets down to you're not happy with life and you want to have somebody to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Government is the easiest, always has been, the easiest entity to blame for your personal troubles, as opposed to taking personal responsibility. The essence, in my opinion, of the COVID-19 scenario is people don't want to take personal responsibility. So you got to wear a mask. Who cares?
Right.
Wear the mask. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you if my mask will prevent everything from coming in. I don't care. As a Christian, my duty is to submit to the oracles of man, to what the ordinances of man. If the government says we need to do this, I took polio vaccines, smallpox vaccines when I was a kid, didn't die from it.
Right.
Why should I mistrust somebody who helped me before? And of course, the government was essential in my coming out of the group that I came out of anyway. So I trust the government instinctively.
So speak to Christian ministers who are part of these. I think they're kind of authoritarian cults myself, because they're getting direct revelations from God and casting out demons. But some of these people have died from COVID after like calling it a hoax. With the members of the congregation, like, what would you say to the members whose leader said it was a hoax and then the leader died of COVID?
You have two choices. You, as a Christian, you either believe the scriptures or you don't. And when you have to recognize as a Christian that you have one mediator between you and God, who is Christ Jesus, as far as Christians are concerned. Is your mediator the Christ in the scriptures, or is it your pastor who is fallible?
Yep.
Okay. So if your pastor is preaching stuff contrary to scripture, contrary to the example that Jesus laid out for us, which one should you do away with? Well, I'd do away with the pastor. I'd keep Jesus, I'd keep the scriptures, And especially once this guy has said something is a prophecy that doesn't come true, you need to run for the hills. Go to another church and publicly denounce what this guy's doing. Which is equivalent to the old stoning in the Old Testament, I guess. You need to get him out of his position of authority.
And talk to people who are in these groups that are so afraid of Satan, and they're so afraid of being possessed by demons.
And that's been around forever too. Even the Pentecostal, early Pentecostal days, we used to kid even at the CSA about the demon behind every rock. That there was, everywhere you went, there were demons. And what it gets down to, and again, from a Christian point of view, or even a Jewish point of view, is who's more powerful, God or the devil? Because, which should be, God.
Right.
Devil is supposed to be a created being. This whole doctrine of good versus evil as if it's an equal battle, and hopefully someday God is going to win, doesn't say, well, one, it's not scriptural. Two, doesn't say too much about our God.
Right.
So you have to help them to understand that there is really no battle. The battle is up here in our mind first of all, as you know,
Yep.
and thinking things through, like Isaiah says, come and let us reason together. You've got to think things out. God gave you a brain to use it, not abuse it. So use it,
Yeah.
and start to think how ridiculous a lot of this is.
Yeah. So, wow, what we've just been talking about around COVID and the vaccine and these ministers, I think you have a powerful, powerful testimony and a lot of wisdom. And of course, you're religious and you know your scripture, right?
I try.
So I think that aside from helping people who've gotten, you know, up in the racist, extremist, paramilitary piece, there's another work that you can really contribute heavily and just like message to
Yeah.
all of the media's been calling it Trump's evangelical Christian base, which all of my evangelical Christian friends are like, no, Jesus said, thy kingdom is not of this world.
That's right.
And as you do to the least in the kingdom, you do to me,
Right.
and go and visit the sick and help the poor. And
Yeah,
that's not what these dominionists, Christian nationalists, these prosperity ministers who say, give me all your money and then God's going to give it back to you tenfold. Like, that's not what Jesus was teaching.
Right.
My understanding.
That's right.
And I've just been disappointed that Christians have not spoken out more about this.
It's outrageous. Of course, in the South, when you're talking about evangelicals, they're by and large Republican.
Yeah.
So then you have to decide which is more important, political party or your Christianity, your faith, your belief system, which is more important. And if you're leaning towards the Republican Party and away from Christ and the scripture, then you need to re-examine your belief system.
Yep.
Here's the other thing, Stephen. The religious aspect is one part of the overall right-wing mentality. The other part is the patriotic, quote unquote, movement.
Yeah.
You want to get back to the Constitution and that kind of stuff. In understanding and this is an umbrella of everything, but to understand these two camps, when the Republicans, the political aspect of the movement, keep saying we want to go back to the original Constitution, to the original interpretation of the Constitution. We want to go back to the founding fathers. Those are code words that people don't really think about, because in the reality, it sounds good on paper. But the reality is, if you go back to 1776, did women have any rights? No. Did minorities have any rights? No. So the white men who say we want to go back to the Constitution are basically saying we want to have control again.
Yeah.
It's the good old days of white males having all the power. And that's what they fear, is losing the power.
Yeah.
With the religious right, it's we want to get Jesus back again to restore the family units. You got a different set of enemies, but the goal is to get Jesus back. So there's a certain point on both sides, but in terms of Christianity, there's a certain point where you quit just wanting talk. We want action now, because maybe we can accelerate God's plan for the return of Jesus, which is ludicrous on its surface, but that's the mentality. So, if God's not going to bring the tribulation and the wars and all that kind of stuff, then we have to. The political parties say the same thing. It's going to take an overthrow, a spilling of blood to get us back to that. But both sides want to do away with women having any say so and minorities having any say so.
Yep. And also to ignore, the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
The founding fathers.
Yeah. We want to set up a theocracy.
Exactly. And that's so opposite what the Constitution's about.
Yeah. The other thing is that I discovered ages ago was that especially if you're, either side, you quit having faith. You quit having belief in what you even say that you believe. Christians, this is obvious because you're listening to your crazy pastor instead of the scriptures and instead of Jesus. On the political side, you say you want the Constitution, but you don't even believe of the power of the Constitution anymore. You're not willing to abide by the Constitution. You're not willing to abide by the Declaration of Independence. You don't have any faith in the system whatsoever.
Right.
Here's what is significant to me. With the election, the Democrats thought they were going to take it by storm. When the vast majority in the House, win the Senate by quite a bit, get Biden in there. And what really, really happened is that people said, we don't want Trump because we don't want to keep going to the right, but we don't want socialism either.
Yeah.
We don't want to go too far to the left. We want the center. That's where we feel safe.
Yeah.
America's message was we want to be safe again.
Yep. I
You
agree.
try to make America great, but if America great isn't safe, what good is it? We
Right.
want on the center. And that's why we have a 50-50 Senate. That's why we have a more narrow House.
Yeah.
And so listen to the people. You say that you're a servant, political servant of the public, of the people that elected you. Listen to what they're saying. They're not saying we want extremism.
Right.
We want to be safe, but choose wisely. Do the laws that help us out as a country.
Right.
And
But
Congress is failing in that.
there's a whole bunch of Americans and some politicians that are standing by the big lie.
Yeah.
And how can you have a democracy based on lies?
Well, as you know, eventually the lies are going to fall apart and crumble.
They've
It may take longer than we want, and that may take some people down with it, but eventually, people see.
But I really believe, like you, in reaching out, doing what we can to share our experiences with love, with respect, asking
Yeah.
questions, sharing our stories, and encouraging people to really think for themselves. And if they
Right.
are religious, God didn't make Adam and Eve zombie brainwashed clones. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been, disobedience, right? So
Yeah.
there was something in the divine plan, however you want to understand God, to not mind control and brainwash people to be all conformists.
Right. Yeah. I think Jesus was the prime example of coming out and saying to the people on the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard this, but let me tell you this. So even in those days, Jesus, especially being who he was, understood, I got to get people to think. Not just accept what they've been taught, not to just accept tradition,
Yeah.
but to think. And I need to show them a different way to think.
Yep.
And that's what we do.
Yeah, it's great. Kerry, thank you. We're going to
Thank
talk
you.
again. I'm going to wrap up because I'm sleepy at this point. But we're going to talk again. We're going to get your website and ways for people to reach you. I'll do a blog, and you said there are 300 copies left. So
Yeah,
if you want one of a collector's copy, can they get it on Amazon, or how do they buy it?
Go to Amazon. It's there. Just type in Tabernacle of Hate.
Yep.
And
Kerry
then take you right
Noble.
to it. Got some great
Covenant
reviews
sword
on it.
and the arm of the Lord, a good Christian who's now in Texas. You right? And
Yep.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to be in contact with you again. Thanks, Stephen.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.